Hey everybody, I'm Julian with DevExpress and welcome to today's webinar, Take a Closer Look at the DevExpress Web Report Designer, presented by Web Program Manager Mehul and Technical Evangelist Don Wibier. In this webinar, Mehul and Don will show you the DevExpress Web Report Designer. You'll learn how to get started, and then they'll dive deeper into the common questions and issues that come up when using this powerful new designer. This session is being recorded and will be available on our DevExpress YouTube channel later on today. We'll also do a live Q&A at the end of the presentation. Just type your questions in your GoToWebinar control panel at any time throughout the broadcast. Questions may also be answered during the presentation as well. And now I shall hand things over to Mehul and Don. Hello guys.
Hey Julian, thank you very much. Hey Don, how are you doing?
I'm fine.
All right, excellent. Welcome everybody. Welcome to the webinar called the DevExpress Web Report Designer, or taking a closer look at it. And the idea here was that we have this control, the Web Report Designer, and it's been out for a couple of years. We released it late 2014, I believe, and it's awesome. It's amazing. Now, if you're new to the reporting framework, don't worry. There's lots of great videos. Just go to devexpress.com/reporting and it'll take you to the landing page here, and you can look at all the getting started videos. But today we want to focus specifically on this designer. Now, those of you who are reporting customers know that this is a very powerful designer. Now, previously, if you wanted to design a report, create a report, edit a report, you would have to use this designer, but this designer was WinForms based. In fact, it was the same designer that we provide in our Visual Studio instance. So if you create a report in Visual Studio, you get this really nice designer. Now, if you wanted to use this for the web, we had a solution where we said, hey, take this rich designer, this WinForms based one, and use click once to deploy it to your customers, which is a fine solution, but it's not really web-based, and it's not truly what you want to create. So what we did was, when we created a new report designer for the web, we really did it right. We made a beautiful one, and we made one for the web using a lot of client-side technology, so HTML5, JavaScript, all that nice things. And so you got the same exact amazing features that you did from the Visual Studio one or the WinForms one in the web one. 99% of all the things you can do there, you can do here on the web as well. Now, to see it in action, you can go to our web report demos and just click on Report Designer, and you can see any report that's enabled with the designer. You can start modifying it, and you've got all these great things like the report bands and so forth. So today, what I want to do is Don and I are going to show you a lot of demos, a lot of code. Don't worry, it's not too tough, but we want to take you through the progression from the very basic of how do I get started? If I have a basic report, how do I start using the designer? So just the exact 101 experience. And then we want to dive into some common topics that come up very quickly when people start off with a web report designer. So things like, how do you connect it up to a data source? What is that story like? How do you save a report onto a server and so forth? And then finally, how do you take it even further and customize parts of the report designer? So Don, are you ready to show off some good demos today?
Absolutely. I'm going to show some really cool demos.
All right, and are they crazy demos where people are not going to be able to follow, or is this something where people are like, yes, I want to address this, I want to try this in my report today?
I am going to produce some code, but it is pretty much easy to follow, and I'll explain everything I'll do, so you'll be fine. Absolutely.
All right, that is great news. All right, so let's just dive right into it and start with the basic story. Now, in here, just to save a little time, because we've got a lot to show, all I've done here, I've gone and done a file new and created a new web forms project, and it was pretty much empty. It just had a default ASPX page, and as you can see, the page is empty. There's nothing on this page. In fact, let's just run it so I can kind of show you. Again, see, empty page, nothing on this page. So The only thing I've gone ahead is added a extra report class. Now, as you know, if you guys are extra report customers, you'll know that extra reports are saved as class files, as objects. And so when you want to create them, you just instantiate a version of that object. So all I've done here is I've added an XR label and simply typed in 3 lines of text. So now, if I wanted to display this report on the web, the first thing I'd need to do is I need to have a way to view that report. So if we go ahead and take a look at the reporting tab, you're going to find the ASPX document viewer. Now when I drop the document viewer on my form, you can see I've got this beautiful document viewer. And to load up the report inside of here, what I want to do is first instantiate a instance of that report. So I'm going to create a var called RPT, and I'll call instantiate a new extra report. And now I can simply call the ASPX document viewer, set its report property to RPT. So now when we run this, and because it's on page load, I've got the document viewer on this page, and now I can display the report. That's it. A couple of lines of code, and we've got a report. So how do we now enable this to be editable on the web? Well, we need that report designer. So the first thing I want to do is I want to create a new page. And the reason for this is because the designer is a very big surface area. It's a design surface with a lot of items that you might want to change. You want to actually have it on its own page. You don't want to put it in a corner of a page or something like that. A designer is a big place where people want to be able to edit the full report. So I'm going to create a new empty page called designer, and on here I'm going to drop a ASPX report designer. So under the reporting tab, we'll find the ASPX report designer. When I drop it on the page, you can see already it's got it takes up pretty much all our surface area here. And then it gives a couple of helpful hints about how to display the report designer and call it open report method or XML layout method. So what we're going to do is to edit the report is we are going to go to the code behind for the designer and simply call the ASPX report designer open report method. Now here I can pass in a new instance of the extra report the same way. Now yes, I can create a new var and all that good stuff, but I'm just going to be a little lazy and instantiate directly in the open report method. Now it's important that we add a couple of extra checks, and that is to first check to make sure that this is not a postback or it is not a callback. Now Don, why is this important to do?
Well, as you mentioned, the designer uses quite some advanced technologies, so it includes callbacks and asynchronous calls. And if that is happening, the report designer would instantiate a new report, which will lose all of the changes.
All right, so now I'm going to go open the demo directly into the designer. Thank you, Don, by the way. And as Don mentioned, see here we've got the report designer. We're viewing it, and it loaded up our report. And as Don mentioned, this designer uses a lot of callback technologies because it's web-based. It does a lot of very nice things in here. And if we're not going to check to see if it is doing a postback or callback, let's say we had made some changes here. We set some database items or parameters, and then if it did a callback, then it might accidentally reload that report, and then we would lose our changes and we'd be back to square one, and we'd be like, hey, that's not what I wanted to do. Or more specifically, the end user would get frustrated. So that's one reason we add those checks in. Now, as I mentioned, we're on the designer page. But if I go back just to the default ASPX page, how am I going to go back to the designer? So what I want to do is I want to add some button, something here, just like we have in our web demo here. You click this report designer button and it takes you. So what I want to do is I want to add a similar button here that says edit report that allows us to navigate to that designer page. All right, so let's go back to our default ASPX page here, and we'll just go to design. And from the toolbox, you can use a standard button. I'll use an ASPX button. simply because if I was using a DevEx theme, the button would style in the same manner. And then I will give it a text. I'll call it edit report. And on its click property, we want to set basically a very simple call, and this is just a response.redirect. Now we're going to redirect to our designer ASPX page. And that's it. So now when I run the default ASPX page and I'm viewing my report, I've loaded up the report, I can now hit edit report, which is going to redirect us to the designer page, and now we're editing this exact report that we're looking at. That's it. That's the File New 101 experience. As you saw, very easy to get started with the report. But now you might be asking yourself, okay, that's great, but how do I now connect it up to a data source? So for that, I'll hand it over to my excellent colleague here, Don.
Yeah, thanks Mehul for this really nice introduction. There are a couple of things before we can continue that needs to be explained a bit, because yeah, in a real-world application you would probably already have a report designed, or you might want to set up a new report. But the most important thing is you need to expose, as a developer, you need to expose data sources to that report designer. So your users are able to pick any data source that you are allowing them to use. And for that I have put up a little slide, because you can actually add data sources to the designer, but then you'll notice that something will not work quite right. And let me first show you that by a really simple example, which I already prepared in a similar way as Mehul did. I have a default or a pretty much empty application, and I already put on a report designer, and I put on a standard ASP.NET SQL data source. It's connected to a database. It runs a fairly simple query. In this case, it will just run select everything from genre, which is coming out of the Chinook database, which holds some music, artists, and tracks, etc., which is ideal for this kind of stuff. Yeah, and ideally I would like to expose this particular data source to the report designer, so somebody can make a report out of this data source. So, well, if we take a look at the notes underneath the report designer design service, it says to display the report designer, call this open report or open report XML layout. Well, Mehul just showed it to you. But I would like to start with the second note. To be able to run the report designer, the application must reference all necessary JavaScript files. Because this is a really nice client-side control, we depend on a number of libraries like jQuery, jQuery UI, Knockout, and Globalize. And in case you are already having an application that you want to extend with this designer functionality, you might already use one or more of these libraries, and that might cause some problems if you are linking your own libraries in and DevExpress is also emitting those libraries, because we want the designer to work. So it's just something to keep in the back of your head. If you are using any of those libraries yourself, please reference the other ones as well and go to the web.config. And in the DevExpress configuration settings, we have a setting which is defaulted to true. It says embed required client libraries. If you are using your own, put this to false and make sure that those files are linked in, so you will not run into any version conflicts and that kind of stuff. So just a quick side note. But anyway, we were going to add this SQL data source to the report designer. So I'll go back to the first line, open report. So if I switch back to the code behind, I will need to expose that to the report designer. And the way we can do that is by filling the data source collection with data sources. And I put in two different kind of data sources. This one is a collection which is holding a number of items, which I coded right here. It's a really simple class, but it's just for demonstration purposes. So this item list has 10 items which hold a property name. And I want to have the DS genres data source in there as well. And this is something that I'd like to show, because this is something which we get quite some questions about on the support center. If I run this application, you will notice that something is not working really right. And once the application has started, I'll switch over on the right side to the data source tab, and that is over here. And now I can add the data sources that were assigned in the code behind by populating the data source collection. But what happens here is there are no fields in here. I mean, ideally, if I would expand this data source, I would get all of its fields, and I could drag out one of those fields and put it in the report designer. And even worse, if I go to the design wizard, I can pick one of those data sources, but you'll see that there is no data to display because this data, the report designer doesn't know what kind of information is inside that data source. And this is something which needs a little bit of explanation, and that is basically that we need to serialize the metadata of the data source to the client, in this case the report designer, so the report designer knows what kind of information is in there. And in the current report designer, you need to stream that down to the client in XML format. So yeah, you might think, okay, so I have to create some XML document, or what? How does that work? Well, that's pretty simple, because the C# and the .NET framework have some great functionality for doing that. But we need, yeah.
I was told there would be no XML editing. So you're telling
Absolutely
me I
not.
Are you sure? Because I see XML necessary over there. That's starting to worry a little bit.
Yeah, but as I mentioned, the .NET framework has some great stuff where you don't need to worry about XML, but you need to produce it somewhere. But you'll see in a minute that there are a couple of scenarios of overcoming this issue. And I'll start with the simpler ones, and I'll leave the more difficult one, though it isn't XML writing, I'll leave the more difficult one to the last demo. So what we can basically do is we can use the DevExpress data access data sources instead of the SQL data source, because the SQL data source that I used, the standard ASP.NET one, the reporting engine doesn't know what kind of data comes out of it, and it doesn't know how to serialize that. So if we would insist on using that SQL data source, we could also create a custom serializer, which is the one that I'll show in the end. But the data access data sources that come with DevExpress are actually some really powerful controls or components, because they are basically the foundations of our own object relational mapping tool, XPO, also persistent objects. And so we know how to talk to different databases as well with that, which is pretty cool. But let me show you how we can expose that genre query to the report designer. So here is my Visual Studio again. And I have set up a couple of things here. So I'll start by using the DevExpress SQL data source. So this is not the same data source as the one that I dropped on my form, but this is a non-visual control, and it allows me to create an SQL data source. And this data source I'm going to add to the designer as well. But before this demo is going to run, I obviously need to declare this method. And this method is just something which initializes my data source. And what happens is I'll create a new data source, and you can watch the constructor, because we can just pass in a connection string name, which was defined in the web.config, and it will be good. The next thing that we're doing is we're going to add a query to this data source, and this is where it differs a bit from the normal ASP.NET data source. But as you can see, it's the same statement. And next I need to tell the data source that it needs to sync up a bit, and I'm going to return this instance. And with this in place, I have basically two data sources which are both trying to generate the genre query. And with this in place, you'll notice that things are starting to work much better now. And once the application has been started up again, you'll see that I have the MS SQL data source here. And what I can do now is, if I expand it, you see that my query is here. And if I expand the query, you see that I have the fields here. And now I can get like this one, drop it somewhere on the report, or I can just go to the wizard, select this data source, and select this view, and finish it off. And for everybody who is paying a bit of attention here, you might notice that there is like an extra level in here. If I switch over to the other one, I hope it isn't refreshing. This was the query straight away, so this was the other one. But here we have another level inside. And this is actually pretty cool, because I could also add another query in this same statement. So I could say, because the queries is a collection, I can just say, give me something from album as well. And if I run this one again, that might not be entirely good. I should change the name, because now I don't know what is what. So that was not really the way to go. But now you'll see that I have two queries. So you can define all your queries in one of those SQL data sources, and they will be available right here. And here I've got the my genre query, and here I've got the my album query. And also, if I do want to start the wizard again, I can now pick the other one as well. So this is a pretty simple way, but yeah, you have to get your queries. If you're using an SQL approach in your application, you have to get your queries and add them to an SQL connection. So that wasn't too difficult, I'd say. But I can hear you think, yeah, but Dom, this is all very nice, but I'm not using any SQL-based approach. I would rather use something object-based. So for instance, I have something like this. So how am I going to do that? Well, that's really not too difficult, because we have, besides the SQL data source, we also have an object data source. And this one works also again different from the object data source which comes with the .NET framework, or with ASP.NET to be precisely. This one is also able to serialize things out of the box, just like the SQL data source that I was just using. So let me implement this method, and let me instantiate a new object data source. I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to specify the type that we want to use, so that will be my item list. and it needs some information on how to create those objects when deserializing, etc. And I'm going to return it. And with this in place, you'll see that we have another data source assigned to the report designer, and that will display the items collection quite nice. So here is the my object data source, and well, this is exactly what we wanted, because now I can also use the designer again, but I can also drag in this name property, and you'll notice the little database icon here. So that means that this label is already bound to that particular field inside that data source. So that is the way if you want to do the object-oriented approach, if you're having a data layer based on objects. I do want to show you like the most cool one actually. In case you're using Entity Framework, which is also object-based, we can do it even better. Because what I did in this demo, and I'm going to show it to you right now, I have already created my model classes based on the database. So I've used the wizard to create a code-first approach on Entity Framework. So all my entities are in here. So here's the genre. I've got the album as well. And I've got the Chinook model, which is the DB context class. And well, what I can do now is even more simpler. I can just use an Entity Framework data source, because that's one of ours as well, where I pass in the type of the DB context class, and I'm going to add that Entity Framework data source to the report designer. And watch what's happening now. And this is actually pretty cool stuff, I have to say. Because you can imagine with the other approaches, you need to register those queries or those objects. You need to create the object data sources. But with the Entity Framework data source, I will have access to all of my tables here. I can have access to all of my fields here. And I have all the information which is available through Entity Framework. So this makes this a very easy and powerful way of fast configuration of your data sources in the report designer.
You're right, Don. I like that third approach. It's got a little more code, but you're providing your end users with a much better experience, much richer metadata, and you could even control what entities and what items that they're exposed to. So that's really smart.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but there could also be a case that you are using some other data access technology or layer, or which is based on objects, or maybe some proprietary stuff where we don't have like a data source for. But in that case, you might want to use the approach that I was showing in the slide deck, using the custom serializer. So I'm going to show you that as well, and I'll do it pretty quick, but you'll see that the code is not too difficult. But I just want you to show that it is possible, and this gives you the possibility to really fine-grain the amount of information which is streamed over to the client for this design time features. So I'm going to create a serializer which will make this data source still work, because now it wasn't showing any table or any fields and stuff, and it was not working all together. But I'm going to create a serializer based on this data source which comes with the .NET framework. And to do that, there are a couple of steps involved. I need to create a class which implements a certain interface, and for that I have set up an empty class file already. The second step is I need to register an instance of this class to the serialization engine which comes with the reporting framework. And the last step is that when I create a report or an instance of a report, I need to tell that report that we want to use that particular serializer which we already registered. So those are the 3 steps. So let me start with the first one, and I'm going to create a class which implements the iData serializer as I mentioned before. And this means if I implement this interface, there are only 4 methods. And the first one and the third one are the simplest ones. They only need to check whether the data can be serialized or if the string data can be deserialized. Well, let me tell you, the can serialize is just a matter of checking if the data parameter is of a specific type. And I happen to know that the result of this particular select method is a data view. So I can just say, alright man, if the data is a data view, we're good. And if we're good, we can serialize it. And with a data view, it's quite simple to serialize it to XML, because I'm going to create a table out of that data view, and I'm going to use a string builder in combination with an XML writer to persist the contents of that data table, including its schema, into that string builder. And because we need to return a string, I'm going to return the toString method of the string builder. And with this I've written XML. Well, Mehul, does this look like difficult XML?
No, you've kept your promise, and you've minimized all XML. So I guess let's give, because somebody else had a question about this.
Yeah.
You know, the reports themselves are serialized to XML, and that's what really. So can you bring up that slide again real quick, Don? So the reason we bring up the mention XML is because XML is how the reports is serialized, and that's why we use the XML format quite a bit. And so it really doesn't matter to you as a developer too much, except for when you need to write maybe a custom serializer. But the important thing is, the benefit for us as developers and your end users is, and as somebody else also asked, is that this is a common format. This is the same report that you can open in our WinForms reporting suite or WPF reporting suite. And so it's a cross-platform reporting solution that works. Again, so it's not so much about the XML, just that's the details of how we handle it behind the scenes. It's just a great benefit for you that it works on either the Web Report Designer or the rich one as well. All right, Don, back to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and because of the nature of web, we need to serialize that on a certain protocol. So if you're using WinForms with reporting, you don't need the serialization stuff because it's like a different approach, obviously. It's a different architecture, but the report definitions are the same. You can exchange them. So let me quickly finish off this serialization, the serializer, because we're now going to do it the other way around. I'm going to check whether the type name parameter holds the system.data.dataview. If that's the case, we can deserialize, and in that case the code is even smaller for deserializing actually. I'm going to create a new data table. I'm going to use an XML reader which will read the XML which is in this value, and the table is able to fill itself from this XML through the reader. And next I'm going to instantiate a new data view where I pass in the table. And with that in place, I've done the first step for a custom serializer. And in this case, I mean, the data view is really simple to write and read from XML and stuff. But if you have your own data architecture, it might be a bit more work, or it might work slightly different. But this is the general approach on some serializer like this. So the second step was we need to register this serializer with the reporting system. And we only need to register it once, so we could immediately go over to the global ASICs, application start, and tell the system to register an instance of my serializer. just like here. This register serializer method needs a name to identify it, and it needs the instance, and this is why I used a public constant inside that class which holds the name. And this name is used on the third step as well, and that was we need to tell the report that we instantiated right here that we want to use that serializer on this particular report. So we can do that through the extensions dictionary which comes with the report, and also again we need to use that name to identify the particular serializer. And with this in place, if I run the application again, you'll notice that the first data source, which initially wasn't working, is now using this serializer class that I just created. And if I go to genres and expand it, you'll see that we have the fields here. And this means that my serializer works. And I can show you that by selecting this one, quickly load up all the fields, make a report out of it, and if I hit this preview button, you'll see that we have a nice report based on that particular data source, the standard SQL data source. So that is some important information, I'd say, about how to connect data sources and how to get a good user experience on your report designer. So let me get back to my slide deck quickly and see what we have next, and that is report storage. And that is another thing that we didn't talk about yet. We are dealing with a report designer running in your web browser, and the chances are that you want to store your report definition on the web server. And that might be in a database, or it might be on the file system of the web server, or I don't know, whatever, but you probably want to save it on the server. And that depends entirely on your application, how you want to save it or how you want to do it. You also might want to open existing definitions back from the server in the client. So basically it would be nice if I switch over to the designer. Let me close down this demo by going back to here. It would be nice if we would have like a thing here which says save and open and save as and that kind of stuff, which is not the case right now. For that we need a storage extension, and a storage extension tells the report designer where to find like reports and where to store reports, and it will receive the information, the binary information of the definition, and store it on the server somewhere. For this demo I have set up and prepared a number of things because I'm going to show you a cool demo. I'm going to show you how to use a pop-up control in combination with the DevExpress file manager to select a report from the server and to save one to the server, where we can just browse a particular folder, create subfolders and reports. So it's a pretty nice demo, but you might understand that it's quite a bit of work to do it all in this webinar. So what I'll do is I'll tell you what I have prepared quickly so we can get started. I have set up a custom control, which is the file dialog control. And this dialog control uses a form layout which allows us to quickly arrange all kinds of controls on a page. It uses a callback to send over some information to and from the server, and it has a couple of buttons, and we are using the layout control to position the file manager and the buttons. Well, if you switch over to the markup, it's quite a bit of markup, but that's because of the file manager, the layout control. I have also included a bit of script here to get some references to the particular controls. the second thing that I prepared is I put in a script file, a JavaScript file, which binds together basically all the controls needed for this operation client side to be bind together. So we have references on one place here. I've got a button OK click, so I've got some event handlers, and I've got something which occurs after a callback has completed. Furthermore, I have in my default page I have linked in that script file. I also linked in the second script file, which holds a number of methods which needs to be executed at certain stages. But I'll get to that a bit later. So that is a bit about the user interface and how to set it up, and feel free to check this out. It's pure the UI of this kind of stuff. I want to talk about that custom storage implementation. What I've done here is I've created an empty class which derives from our report storage web extension. And this is basically the same approach as we did with the serializer. We need to create such a class, and then we need to register an instance of this class to the reporting system in the global ASICs, and then this will be used. So let me put in some code to make this all work. So I'll declare a couple of private members. The constructor will fill those private members, so the folder where we want to have as a root location for the reports. I want to have a reference to the HTTP context, so I can use some of those methods there, and a small helper method. I have commented this stuff out so my demo would run, but I'm going to uncomment it right now. And I am going to override a number of methods of this storage class. So for instance, the can set data, which is pretty short. I'm just going to check whether I can access that location. I'm going to do the same with the get data. So I'm going to read the contents of such a report definition in this case. And next, to display the information about reports on the server or in the database or whatever, we're going to do it, we're going to fill this dictionary with folders and files. Then there is a bit of validation involved, like is the URL valid, can I write to that specific location. We're trying a bit of creating and deleting files so we know sure that we can write to that particular location. And in the end, I will write the report definition, and this is handed over. This is the stuff that you have been designing in the designer, and that is sent over to through XML. The report engine picks it up and makes it like an extra report again, and we can write that layout to disk in this case. So with this in place, I have my custom storage class configured. So the next step was we need to register that, and let's do that by calling the register extension global from the report storage web extension. And I'm going to pass in a new instance of this particular storage class that we just created. And with this in place, there is only one thing that we need to do, and that is we need to add that user control to the page. So I can just pick this one up, and I'm going to drop it right here. Here we are. And the file dialog control has a small property that we also need to set, and that is a client instance name. And this is something that I coded myself in this particular control. So we have the client instance name, and let me quickly get rid of that. I would also like to code the client-side event customize menu actions. And this more or less brings us to the last thing that I wanted to show you in a webinar anyway, and that is customizing the menu. I want to change the default actions on those menu items like save, and I want to have open, and I want to have save as. And for that I triggered this event. This is a client-side event which will find certain menu actions, and I'll show that in this script. Let me see, here is it. This method will take a look at the configured menu items, and it will change its behavior by reassigning the click action basically. So these are some client-side things going on with the report designer as well. But with this in place, let me double check that I didn't forget anything, but because it would be cool if it run. And I guess we are ready to rock. We are not ready to rock. I just forgot a bit of JavaScript. With this in place, we are ready to rock. I had to move over the customized menu actions to the file here, otherwise it won't work. And there are a couple of interesting things that you will see because I did the report storage extension. This also means that the menu has a couple of additional items here. Now we have an open method and we have a save as method as well. And those extra items appear once we have registered a storage extension to the report designer, which is a nice to know feature. So with this in place, I could actually click on open, and in this case we do not have any reports yet, so there is nothing to do here. But I can just cancel it and create a new report. So let me quickly create something, I don't know, I'll take genres. And you know what, I'm gonna do the new via wizard. Makes things a lot faster. And with this in place, I'll be actually able to store it on the server by using this custom UI, including the custom storage extension.
This is great, by the way.
It was now saved on the server.
Very cool, Don. That is excellent. I mean, look at that experience as an end user. You've given them a file dialog. They're basically managing all the reports, right? So using various DevExpress controls, they're able to create, I guess we don't call it data binding, but connecting to a data source. You've got these reports. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I'd say so. And this is I mean, the demo itself requires a bit more checking out of the code because I went over the client-side portion pretty fast. But I hope this gives you an idea on how you can customize things quite a bit on the report designer.
So this demo, we are going to put it up on GitHub as we usually do with most of our demos. So
Absolutely.
Go to devexpress.com/blogs, and Don is going to write a follow-up blog post that will link to all the code, links to any helpful articles we mentioned. So Don, is there still more to show off?
Well, I've already talked a bit about customizing the menu extension. I can mention that it is also pretty simple. Let me switch over to Visual Studio again. The last thing I'd like to mention, if you want to add custom menu actions to your report designer, that is also not too big of a deal. That's actually quite simple, because if I switch over to the design view, I can go to the designer here, and it will hold a collection with menu items, and here I can add my own super duper action. I can even code in the GS click action straight here, like something like this, but I could also use the other routines. Let me see, I missed something, I guess. That would be a bit of a bummer if that wouldn't work. But you can obviously use other ways of triggering this click as well. And with this in place, I have also shown you how easy it is to add custom menu items and take certain actions on that. And in this case, the action was just a simple alert. But I mean, you can virtually do whatever your imagination allows you to do. So this was actually the last small feature that I'd like to show on customizing the designer.
Wow. Okay. So that was awesome. Thank you. And I want to really get to the questions because first of all, everybody who's joined us today, thank you very much. And you know, some of these questions are great. We have some really smart customers that are already doing some amazing things. So let's just dive into some of these questions. All right. The first, early on, somebody asked us, will DevExtreme 16.1 JavaScript only have any reporting capabilities like extra reports? So the short answer is yes and no, which I know it's a terrible answer. I hate answering it. So the reason for the no is because reporting isn't really a client-side activity, right? You want to view the report on the client side, but you're not going to really how do you say, bind. The data is on the server, so you're going to create the report on the server anyways, but you want to be able to stream it and have a way to view it on the client side. And we are working on that. So in 16.1, we're planning to separate the server and the client part of our report viewer so that you'll be able to at least view it with a client-side application like DevExtreme. So you still need to connect it up to a web service for the report creation, but now at least you have an option. Now, Don, can you bring up devexpress.com/webinars?
Absolutely.
Somebody asked, you know, we just announced, you probably got the email about a CTP of our web, scroll down please, the web dashboard designer. Well, you know, I'm going to punt that question to Julian and Paul, who are actually going to be presenting on this topic next week. So like the short answer is, like we do with most CTPs, the reason for the technical preview is we take one cycle to put it out there because we think there's enough, but we want feedback. So try it out, you know, just be careful putting it out in production, or, you know, don't expect like to have all the bells and whistles. We're just putting the finishing touches on it. So most likely it will be later on this year for the full release, but the CTP is available to you today. So, and if you want to learn about it, join Julian and Paul next week. Okay, then somebody asked, since, well, I think we addressed this. Somebody asked about how is the extra report saved. Again, it's using XML, serialization, and then somebody said, they asked for some links on how to modify this stuff. Again, we're going to take all these questions, put them in into our into our blogging blog post that comes in afterwards. Somebody asked about link to SQL. Does it work the same way as the Entity Framework? Yes and no, as Don showed, but don't use the Entity Framework data source. Use the object data source because it may not be exactly the same. Now, somebody asked, importantly, everything showed here should work also in MVC? Yes, Mark, absolutely. What we showed is going to work for you in ASP.NET MVC as well. If you have specific questions about it, please contact our support. And somebody asked, Jim Bolt asked, how's the report designer with XAF? I'm going to, hey Don, think about that question for a sec. I don't know if you have a good answer. I certainly don't. But we can find out for you, or you can email us afterwards at these emails, and then we'll follow up with you. And to answer, Roberto had a question about, is custom file managing control necessary? I implemented a report web extension that saved reports on a database. It has get URLs of the method. Look, honestly, it's not necessarily. It all depends on what you need. Don really loves a file manager, as do I, and whenever possible we try to show it off because, you know what, your end users love it. It is a web-based version of the file manager that you find in Windows. So again, it's not completely necessary, but we just wanted to show you, what's possible for you as DevExpress customers, everything available to you that you can take advantage of. So you don't even have to use somebody mentioned that, hey, they're not using the report source, they're not using the report source to save it as files, they're using it to save it to the database. Hey, you can do that. The XML format that we're using with the reports allows that. So again, I thank you very much for joining. The sample code you'll find on our blogs. So Don will be writing a blog post today. So just go to devexpress.com/blogs, and that will take you to our blog site where you'll find a blog post likely with the same title like DevExpress Web Reports blog webinar. So thank you again. I'll hand it back to Julian.
Well, thanks, Mehul, and thank you, Don. All right, everybody, check out devexpress.com/webinars for all upcoming webinars. And as Mehul kindly noted, as you see on your screen at the moment, I will be presenting with Paul about intelligent reports and dashboards, and we'll be talking about the new dashboard designer. And you can also access previously recorded webinar sessions there. Hey, Don, could you switch over to the PowerPoint slide deck, please? There we
Absolutely.
go. And if you have any questions about this particular webinar, there's Don and Mehul's email addresses, and follow them on Twitter. Now, please note that today's webinar will also be available later on in our DevExpress YouTube channel. I posted the link in the chat box earlier on. And that's it for this one. Thanks to Mehul and Don for the webinar. Thank you all for joining us. And of course, thank you for choosing DevExpress. Goodbye for now.